Hello and welcome to another magical Saturday stream. I am your host, JoeMagician, and today we'll be diving a lot into House of the Dragon, the upcoming Game of Thrones prequel show. I was trying to decide over the last few days about, I don't know, what should the stream be about? What do I follow up Lenar Strong with? And then the gods made the decision for me by dropping an absolute ton of news about the show and what's coming up in it, including the exact news that I in particular was waiting for, and that is, of course, how Strong got cast. We got to see all of them. All the actors were announced. We got Lionel, we got Larys, we got Harwin. No Alice Rivers yet, but waiting for that one. I mean, at some point they'll probably do Simon Strong as well, but the three main ones, Harwin, Lionel, and Larys, got cast. Absolutely excited to see that. I know other people were waiting for to see Dark Sister and Blackfire and the dragons. I'm just sitting there going where are the Strongs? Why haven't they showed up yet? So yeah, that was targeted right at me. We also filled out a lot more of the royal court with a lot of emphasis on the small council from these castings, but that's not it. That's not the only big news that was out there. That would be enough for a video or something like that. There was a bit more. A podcast done by House of the Dragon showrunner Ryan Condal with his friend David Mandel. We'll get into who they are in the podcast a little bit later, but they recently put out an episode with the one and only George R.R. Martin himself, where after talking for quite a while about collectibles and all that other kind of stuff, they actually started talking about House of the Dragon. And it ended up being sort of hang on a second. Whoops. Ended up being sort of a pseudo interview about George's backstory, him and Ryan Condal's relationship, and what stuff they can say about what's coming in House of the Dragon. And I figured this was a good time to catch up on all of this. I've sort of talked about it as we've been doing the different streams, as different castings have come up, but I haven't talked explicitly about what's in the show so far, because honestly, a lot of it is fairly speculative and a lot of guessing and a lot of people trying to look at set photos and trying to figure out who's doing what and what they are and what they're filming. And I understand there's just a lot of people that find that speculation fun. It's not really me. I like to go with the hard information, and when stuff's officially announced and stuff you don't have to guess at. I know that guessing game's fun. It's not for me. But this is all that good, solid info, so I think this was a pretty good time to do a whole House of the Dragon update, where they are, what they've been filming, who's been cast, and what we can learn about it. But by the way, before we get going, major spoilers here. I haven't been saying that with my recent ones, and I probably should have. Gonna be talking about some of the characters. I'm gonna mention what happens to them, not in real detail, but if you don't want to know anything about what happened in Fire and Blood to a lot of these major characters or secondary characters, these are all secondary characters basically. Pump the brakes. This isn't gonna just be background, basic background info about them. We're gonna be talking about where they're gonna go in the story, where and how they die, that kind of stuff. So just fair warning on that one. And some promo stuff here. I recently put out chapter 5. I'm gonna go ahead and check my own Patreon because I forget which one I just did. I think it was chapter 6. I'm sorry, chapter 6 of Dying of the Light read through. I put out about a week ago now. Chapter 7 will be coming out by the end of the month, so look out for that one. These ones are just me talking. No guests for these ones. So you can find those on my Patreon at patreon.com/JoeMagician. You get access to all of them, along with any other patron-only content I've done at the $5 and up level or the Maester level. Also get access to like the patron Slack. You get to get stuff early, get to see behind the scenes stuff, all the normal Patreon stuff. And when I put out videos, I know it's been a while, but you get like shout outs and stuff like that depending on your level. Also, I see some new folks or people that haven't been here for a while. Hey, Lady Shar, been a while. Glad to see you. Real Red Wolf, first time catching you live. So excited, love your content. Glad you could make it. These are a lot of fun. Didn't know about the podcast thing, says Matthew Dominique. Yeah, it's a podcast that's mostly focused on like film memorabilia and like comic books and stuff like that, because Ryan Condal's a huge nerd. I mean, so am I. I mean, look at the stuff I have sitting behind me. So, but he and David Mandel just do a podcast talking about all that other kind of stuff. And it's actually kind of funny. They just sort of invited George on as an emergency. He came. Like, all right. Sleeko Duck is here. Anders Graham has Nettles been cast? Not officially. There have been people spotted on set, maybe who could be Nettles, but no official word. I also want to say thank you to the super chats that came in before we went live. 10 pounds from Ramona Zamfir. Thank you so much, Ramona. $5 from Carolina Blues, who's in the chat. Thanks for the update. You're very welcome. I'm glad to learn some stuff about what's going on with House of the Dragon. I'm not a real leaks, I don't really do that kind of stuff, but I like knowing like in general what's going on. Oh yeah, I'm just terrible about pronouncing names. Sorry about that. One of my flaws. One of my many flaws. I'm just terrible at names. $50 from Morally here and on the next week's stream, which I set up already. Actually, that's the thing. At the end of the stream, it's going to, when it ends, it's going to pop you up with the next week's, so that you can like hit a like or give yourself an alert or something like that when it goes live. But thank you so much, Maura, for $50. Actually, kind of 100. Really just crushing it, as always, Maura. Just a show of love and support for both of your channels. I'm enjoying the Dying of the Light on Patreon. Love you. You're the best. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Oh, and $10 from Here Be Dragons, aka Steven Stark. I'm looking forward to 17 distinct dragons. Especially psyched for Tessarion. Give me that beautiful blue queen. So that's something that we were talking about in the Slack. That you couldn't really tell the difference between the dragons at the end of Game of Thrones. Like if you showed me Drogon versus Viserion versus Rhaegal, like maybe you could tell which one's Drogon because he was bigger, but they really they didn't do much to differentiate each different dragon. We're assuming that based on the news that came out of the podcast about like how many there are, that they're going to make an effort to make them look different, especially that we saw from the what was it, they put out some artwork a while ago of like test drawings. Oh, and $5 from Sanrixian. Head empty, no thoughts, only Caraxes. Yeah, Mallory's just gonna be drawing dragons like crazy. This is gonna be her favorite thing in House of the Dragon. Like, screw the rest of the drama, screw the dance, the Civil War. She just wants her dragons. Yeah, but I think both of those are true. I think it's fair that they're probably gonna make them have more personality than they did in the main series. Like, what's the difference between Rhaegal and Viserion in the show, other than the fact that how they died? Not much. They didn't have personalities. They were just kind of dragons, which is fair. I mean, but that's an aspect of the books that kind of got pushed to the wayside. Melee's for life, yeah. Oh yeah, make sure you like, subscribe, hit the little bell button for notifications. As always, if we get the likes up to a certain level, I will put on some fancy hats. I got my little GRRM hat sitting behind me with the emerald turtle, and I got my Gandalf hat right there. We get to 150 likes. I'll throw on the GRRM hat for the rest of the stream. 200, we'll throw on the old Gandalf hat. Just a bit of fun, just a little thing to hopefully get people to just slam the like button. But hopefully you just enjoy the content anyway, and you just want to help me out with making sure YouTube recommends stuff, which is the only reason I really care about it. Oh yeah, so I already talked about Dying in the Light stuff. That's on Patreon. You can also check out my Threadless shop. Link is in the description. You can get some ass waffle gear, kind of like this. I've got a sky blue blanket. It's honestly really comfy. Shirts, tank tops, all that other sorts of stuff, stickers, whatever. Head on over to the Threadless shop if you want to pick that up. I know. Make sure you keep your eye on Sanrixion's Threadless shop. She has some cool stuff coming out, and actually recently did a one for Learned Hands, which looks really cool. The Tywin's Dead one. Pretty sure some of you in the chat already have it, but yeah, it's an awesome artwork there. I actually put out a theory this week, but not on YouTube because I did it really quickly. It was about Laris Strong. When I was going through the news about Laris's casting, it just kind of hit me that I was typing the names Breakbones and Clubfoot. I'm like, something just clicked in my head, and I was like, wait a second. What if Laris doesn't have a clubfoot? What if he has broken bones, like breakbones? What if his foot is broken? And Harwin did it. I posted it up on Reddit. It was just a really short thing. I just typed it up over the course of 20 minutes. Maybe it's something I'll turn into a video in the future. Seems to be well received. People seem to enjoy it. It was largely me continuing to try and solve the mystery of like why does Laris join the Greens? Well, this would be a reason for it. If you guys want to go read that, if I turn this into a video, it'd obviously be a lot longer. I'd research it more. If this was just kind of like a fun thing behind the creative process, like where these theories come from, kind of nowhere sometimes. They just sort of hit you like a lightning bolt in the head, and you're like, oh, I wonder if that's true. And then you write it up. It's like, yeah, maybe. Actually, it sounds kind of cool. Yeah, the ass waffle blanket is awesome. I would wear the tank tops, but I'm not gonna do that on stream. I wear them when I like work out or when I'm working in the garden and stuff like that. So let's get down to business, I guess. Not really business. I think we're gonna start here with the casting news first. We got a lot of casting stuff. There's been a lot of speculations for a while, people looking at set photos and trying to like triangulate Instagram likes and follows from different actors and stuff like that to try and figure out who's actually on the show, who's been cited, when they have been cited, what roles they're going to play. Like, I know in particular, Graham Mctavish, I think he's been speculated to be almost everybody on the show that hasn't been named yet. People just keep like throwing it out there because he fits a lot of different roles. We finally got which one he truly is, but we also got just gonna run down the list real fast. We got Harwin Strong as Ryan Core. We got Jason and Tywin Lannister as Jefferson Hall. David Horovich as Grand Maester Melos. Graham Mctavish finally got a real character, and he's Sir Harold Westerling. Bill Patterson was cast as Lord Lyman Beesbury. Gavin Spokes was cast as Lord Lionel Strong, and then finally the one that made quite a splash, especially again for Sanrixion, Lenar Strong was cast as Matthew Needham. We'll get to what's going on there. So these are, like I was saying, these are largely secondary characters. These are mostly small council members. These will not be any of the leads, although a lot of them, some of these will stick around in the narrative for quite a while. But we're talking like Mace Tyrell level, Grand Maester Pycelle level, like Littlefinger Varys, these kind of characters. We sort of stick around in the King's Landing High Council for quite a long time. Eventually they sort of feather out, but it's particularly exciting for me for how strong that we finally got all three of these guys cast. And I actually think they're pretty good castings based on what I saw. I went through before we did this, before I went live, And I was trying to find like clips of these guys and interviews and stuff like that, and I can. It's rare I can watch somebody do an interview or watch somebody in like a clip from a movie and be like, oh yeah, I can totally see why they picked him to do that. And actually, a lot of these actors are theater actors. Most of them do not have a large body of a film or TV. Some of them, this will be like their breakout characters, where if they were in film and TV, they largely played secondary or background characters. They're gonna be pushed forward into it's a quite a bit, but but for real, how strong? Get hype! Can't wait for that one. So hang on a second. I prepared something for this, so watch the magic on screen. All right, here we go. There we go. I did it. We can look at pictures while I'm streaming. So the first one I'm going to start off here is with Ryan Condal. He's going to be playing Harwin Strong, aka Breakbones. Description here from HBO is it says Harwin is said to be the strongest man in the Seven Kingdoms. So Harwin is the eldest son to Master of Laws Lionel Strong and heir to Harrenhal. Enough said. Help me out. How strong? Green or black? Serious questions. They're on both sides of the war. Harwin ended up being on the blacks. Lionel would have been if he was alive when the war broke out. Larys ends up on the greens. They split their loyalties. Alex Rivers ends up on the greens more or less. Do I have a video summarizing my love for How Strong? Well, there's a whole playlist I've done on most of the members of How Strong at this point. I did one on Lucamore the Lusty, Harwin Strong, Larys Strong, Alice Rivers, one on the fake Strong, Robert Strong. There'll be one about Lionel in the future. I'm probably the only content creator that is like narrowly picking out the Strongs as something to talk about. So Ryan Condal, he's an Australian actor. I looked up his IMDb stuff, and he's done kind of a wide mix of roles. He sometimes does comedy, does drama, he even does action a little bit. He doesn't seem to be a particularly huge guy. There are some roles where it looked like he did bulk up for them, but other ones he looked not particularly huge and strongest man in the Seven Kingdoms. You have to assume that as part of taking this role that he's going to be hitting the gym for a lot of it. Notable role for American audiences that you may have seen him in is from the Hacksaw Ridge. It's a World War II movie. He played the character Lieutenant Mandel, who died by a grenade. Otherwise, you probably have not seen him before unless you're really big into Australian TV and movies. They sort of kept going with the Game of Thrones thing where they're not casting huge names for these roles, especially the secondary ones. They're picking people out, and this will be their breakout thing. Much the same for Ryan Condal. Ryan Condal here. As you've probably noticed, it's on this side. From the picture, Ryan is a fairly handsome dude. A lot of people's reaction to seeing Harwin be cast was they sort of went like, okay, I get why Rhaenyra did this. I will understand the thirst she has for Harwin Strong based on how Ryan Condal looks. He's fairly handsome. As I said, he'll probably be bulking up quite a bit to play Harwin. You can probably assume there'll be sex scenes, probably some like shirtless flexing scenes. There'll definitely be some of him at tourneys, like melees and jousting and stuff like that to show off his strength. He's also, if you ever hear him talk, he has a very, very smooth speaking voice. He kind of sounds a bit like, what's his name? Chris Hemsworth. They're both Australian. They have a similar accent to them and a way of talking. And he just sort of comes off as a very charming guy, which should contrast fairly well playing quote-unquote breakbones Harwin Strong, who's sort of a well-off bully who often inflicts serious injuries on those weaker than him because he can. Like this, the name Breakbones comes because he would go to tourneys and kind of like Gregor Clegane, he would specifically try and hurt people. So the idea, I think this is sort of, the character is more or less like a charming Gregor Clegane, I guess. A similar level of enjoyment from using his physical strength to hurt other people. But I think the comp that's probably going to be played on the most, especially with the choice of this dude to play him, is that it's probably going to go more into the idea of Jaime Lannister. That he's going to be someone that's going to come on the screen and he's going to be portrayed as very handsome, very charming, and then as you get to know him, you're going to see that, oh, he probably has like a pretty dark side and he does some pretty morally questionable things, especially as a captain of the Gold Cloaks. I mean, the Gold Cloaks in King's Landing are known for being essentially not like police, but essentially just armed thugs that roam around the city beating up people, and that's kind of what Breakbones does. Yes, hot Gregor. There's going to be a lot of thirst for Harwin Strong. And, you know, that's something that I remember from when people were first watching Game of Thrones and they would see just like pictures of Nikolai Coster-Waldau and they'd look at him and be like, oh, well, he's the good guy. He must be. He looks like basically Prince Charming. And then as the story goes on, George essentially subverts that by making a very handsome, charming, smooth dude essentially a pretty big piece of shit that there's some empathy you grow for, but you see him do some pretty terrible things, and the same should be here for Harwin. That should essentially be the role here. And if you wanted to transpose Jaime and Cersei onto Harwin and Rhaenyra, that's going to be, I think that's the intention of how the characters were written, and that's probably how Ryan will play Harwin. Even although, unlike Jaime, Harwin dies pretty quick in the story. Mary staring into his eyes, feeling concerned about hot Gregor. Yeah, this is gonna be a challenging one. He's gonna be a pretty big piece of shit in the most likely within the narrative, but they're gonna make him basically be a massive thirst trap for the audience. So get ready for that one. No one talks about how strong like this. Yeah, nobody does. I'm like their number one fan. I'm the only one that does this. I'm the only one that's really excited about Harwin Strong as a character. Let's see here. Another super chat from the Sandry. Team Hot Gregor and Team Brain Explosion. Yeah, get ready for Hot Gregor. That's thanks, Mallory. But yeah, those are the comps, I think, for Harwin Strong. You should think of him as Jaime Lannister / Gregor Clegane, somewhere in between those two characters. I mean, we're going to see Harwin going around being a shithead gold cloak. We're also going to see him be extremely charming, and he's going to seduce Rhaenyra. And I don't know if they're going to have him play him dumb or not. It's never noted that Harwin is particularly smart, and actually based on the way that hang on a second. It's noted that their father Lionel is smart and strong at the same time, and it seems like George essentially split them. That Larys got the brains and Harwin got the intelligence. So maybe he'll just be like a big dumb idiot. But it's very likely they could play him somewhere like an evil Thor. Oh, your body's gonna be ready for it. Yeah, shitty cop archetype. Hot Gregor. No, not a himbo. He wouldn't be a himbo because himbos are generally pure and good. He's I'm not sure what the name would be. Maybe like an evil kind of jock like character. But yeah, so we'll see more from Harwin as we see him. I don't know if he's been seen on set, but he'll definitely be interacting with Rhaenyra a lot. He's a major character on the side of the Blacks. I mean, the Rhaenyra's sons will be looking like him a little bit. So, but yeah, I don't think they could have chosen a better person that is probably going to be pretty handsome on screen, and it's going to make a lot of viewers have like complicated feelings about as he starts doing shitty things. Dumb and stupid. So next up we had let's see here, Jefferson Hall. He will be playing both Lord Jason Lannister and Sir Tywin Lannister. The description here is the Lord of Casterly Rock and twin to Sir Tywin Lannister. He also plays Tywin Lannister, a crafty and calculating politician, twin to Lord Jason Lannister. So basically, if you don't know this from the Dance of the Dragons, there's Lord Jason and Sir Tywin, and they are identical twins. But Lord Jason was born first, and so he became the Lord of Casterly Rock, whereas Sir Tywin then essentially went to King's Landing to make a life for himself. And he ended up on a small council quite a bit. He essentially just tried to make a life for himself that way. But you may recognize Jefferson Hall already. He has already been in Game of Thrones. In the first season, he played the ill-fated Sir Hugh of the Vale, who was killed at the hand's tourney by Gregor Clegane. He's the squire that essentially got the big thing in his neck, and then he bled out and died. This was part of the Jon Arryn murder mystery plot that essentially the idea was that his squire was somehow in on it, and the evidence that he was in on it is that shortly after Jon Arryn died, Sir Hugh was then knighted himself, but then killed very quickly. The suggestion is that one part of his armor that guards his neck, like I guess his gorget, I think that's what it's called, was not buckled correctly, and that allowed Gregor to essentially accidentally kill him in the jousting. Although it's Gregor, so I don't think he needs any help to try and kill people. When I introduce them, can you say if the greens or the blacks? Yeah, sure. Both Jason and Tywin are on the side of the greens. They were, throughout the entire war, both House Lannister and the Western Lands basically is declared for the greens and Aegon II. But also this picture, if you're a fan of the Vikings TV show, this is where this is from. He played the character Torstein. He's one of the good friends and trusted member of Ragnar Lothbrok's clan, tribe, whatever. He's in terms of the narrative, he's like below a character like Floki, but he's not quite up there with Ragnar and the rest of the main characters, basically. But he's there. He tends to be kind of like a Jory Cassell, like it was in the first season of Game of Thrones. Not a big speaking part, not a big narrative part, but basically there. And one of the faces in the background you actually could recognize as the series went on. But yeah, this is another character where this will probably be his breakout role. He's going to be playing two relatively important characters within House of the Dragon. And he's going to be doing double duty. He's going to be playing both of the identical twins, which is going to be a little interesting. Like, is this going to be... I don't know how they're going to do this. I think the thing that's going to save them is that Jason and Tywin were rarely in the same place at the same time. Jason would often be back in Casterly Rock ruling the Westerlands, while Tywin would stay in King's Landing. So yeah, as I said, Jason, the slightly older twin, he's the Lord of Casterly Rock. He does serve as Master of Coins for Aegon II when the war breaks out, but he largely stays back and rules Casterly Rock. Tywin, he obviously inherits nothing as the second son, being beat out by his brother by a few minutes. He ends up he spends all of his time in King's Landing, where he holds numerous jobs for the crown. He goes from master of ships to master of coin, and eventually ending up as hand of the king, and actually a regent for Aegon III at the end of after the war. Curious if they will have different hairstyles. That would be a way to tell them apart. Maybe we'll have them dressed differently. Like maybe they'll have Jason that he'll always be in Lannister red, and they'll have Tywin wear more green or something like that to represent that he's on Aegon's side, or black. And actually, the weird thing is, I think that Aegon II's sigil was not green, was it? I think it was a gold dragon on a black field. So maybe he'll wear those colors. Yeah, Aegon II's actual sigil has no green in it, so I mean they're called the Greens, but I don't think that's the colors they always wore. Doesn't he serve Aegon III blind? Is he the guy that I don't know if he's the blind character. Let me look this up. I don't know if that's him. Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, he got by the end of it, he gets blinded, gelded, and mutilated by the torturers. Good call. Yeah, he does end up a pretty mutilated character. So things are not going to be going great for Jefferson Hall as the series moves on. And, you know, they both serve relatively important roles during the Dance of the Dragons. Obviously, Jason is the Lord of Casterly Rock in the Westerlands. He'll be at the head of armies. He'll be leading battles in the vanguards, that kind of thing. And Thailand will probably be the version of Jefferson Hall we see the most. That he'll be more in King's Landing during the chaos of the war rather than actually going out into the field. Although he does end up in the dungeons for quite a long time. So unclear how much screen time he'll get, but definitely early on we should be seeing a lot of Thailand, at least until the chaos of King's Landing, and when it gets sacked, and he gets sacked again, and then there's the riots. At that point, he largely disappears unless they have some reason to go into the dungeons to talk to him. I don't remember the two of them interacting, but you know, they could always just do they can always just digitally insert or do camera tricks so that you don't notice. And one thing about Thailand is that he'll probably be playing a similar role to what we saw from Tyrion and Tywin, and it will be more or less a familiar thing. You can see he kind of has Lannister looks anyways. I think he's a natural blonde. He's got the right facial structure for looking like he could be like related to Lena Headey or someone like that. He's going to be very much more a council member, you know, somebody that's in on intrigues, more political arm of the narrative, rather than like when we saw from Jaime, where he was riding out into the field and he was leading armies and getting captured and stuff like that. He should stay relatively in King's Landing the whole time. So if you're a Lannister stan and you were hoping for, you want to make sure that you get that the lockdown from Game of Thrones, that kind of character that ends up being there, yeah, Jefferson Hall will be playing that as Thailand. I imagine we really won't see much of Jason, at least in the season 1, depending on how far they get into the dance itself. Although Jason dies like a quarter of the way, a third of the way through the dance. He dies at the Battle of the Red Fork, I think, something like that. But yeah, Jefferson and Thailand should be hanging around for quite a long time. Get used to him. He's gonna be in the narrative pretty much the entire way through. And yeah, this is a very different role and a real step up for Jefferson Hall as an actor, because, you know, Sir Hugh was a bit character. I think he was on screen for like 5 seconds. He dies very quickly, and that's kind of it. Torstein is a tertiary character in Vikings. He's somebody you recognize. You get a sort of, you learn his name and that he's there a lot, but he's not really pushing any of the narratives himself. He ends up, I think the most you see from him is that he ends up being one of the, during the many battle sequences, he ends up being one of the POVs that they'll cut to during it to show him killing a bunch of people. That ends up being what he does. I'm the only content creator to showcase how strong, and I'm the only right one. Everyone else is wrong. They should all be focusing on the Strongs. They're going to be super important to the House of the Dragon. Yeah, but that's about it for Jefferson Hall and Tylan and Jason. I mean, he's a handsome guy. I imagine there also will be thirsting after him. He'll be the primary member of House Lannister throughout the show. They really take a backseat during this. The High Towers largely play the role of the Lannisters from Game of Thrones. But yeah, get ready for that. That should be a lot of fun. Do we know how many seasons of House of the Dragon there will be yet? No, but there should be quite a few. They also set it up so that if they fit, it's called House of the Dragon. They didn't call it the Dance of the Dragons because it leaves it open for them to do other time frames. Like if they finish the Dance of the Dragons and let's say they want to go do the Sons of the Dragon with Maegor and Aenys, or if they want to do the Conquest, it could all fit under that title sequence, basically. Yeah, he does look a little Viking, but he's supposed to be. This is from the Vikings TV show. There's other roles he's had where Jefferson looks much more Lannister-ish. So next up, we got here we go, David Horovich. He's playing Grand Maester Mellos. So the description from HBO is that he is the voice of reason and trusted advisor to King Viserys. I honestly don't know much about Horovich. I guess he would be on the side of he's on the side of the blacks, but he dies pretty quickly. You look through his IMDb page. I don't recognize pretty much anything that he's been in. I've never heard of him. He has had a long career. He's been in TV, movies, and theater since around the 70s. I watched some interviews, and he seems like a good pick for somebody that's trying to be a reasonable person, a trusted advisor, somebody that's always putting forth caution. Although there is one fun thing, he actually has a YouTube channel, and during COVID, he started uploading himself reading sonnets, Shakespearean sonnets. So I'm going to put that in the description if you guys want to check it out afterwards. You can get a sense of how he talks, what he's like. Very calming sort of figure. So understand why they made him Mellos. Yeah, Mallory wants the Conquest. A lot of people actually want the Conquest. I don't know about that one. I think the problem with it is that Aegon's not that interesting of a character, and that's what it would be focused around. But yeah. Yeah, Aaron. I mean, it's an easy way for them to expand the brand without having to launch a whole new show. Just House of the Dragon, Sons of the Dragon, or Jaehaerys and Alysanne, or whatever. You could just keep it going and just kind of like they're doing with The Crown, where they're just sort of jumping decades all at once. So Mellos, Grand Maester Mellos, if you don't remember him from Fire and Blood, he tends to be sort of a moderating force in the Small Council during Viserys' reign. He's the guy that's always trying to smooth things over and trying to avoid the Targaryens from erupting in civil war that a lot of people saw were coming, especially after the Great Councils. He's also the guy who suggested that Laenor and Rhaenyra should marry, essentially a political marriage to ensure that Corlys and his massive wealth and fleet are bonded to Viserys and Rhaenyra in the when she tries to take the throne. Even though, again, everybody knew that Laenor was gay. Wow, was gay and did not want to marry Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra didn't want to marry him either, but it was just a political thing. But Mellos is one of the primary counselors who said it was a good idea anyway. We also know that within Viserys' court, he's the one that was telling Viserys to not kill Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, and instead to get him to give up his throne from the Stepstones and welcome him back in the court. Don't let this feud become a war, which it looked like it might, with the way that Daemon was trying to essentially become a king in his own right, and he was courting followers within Westeros. We know that on the other side of that, Lionel Strong, who we'll get to later, is the one who was saying, you know what? Cut Daemon's head off. Your brother's a shithead. He's the rogue prince. He's doing horrible things. He's a bad person. He's a wild card. Get rid of him. Melos is the other side of that. Oh, I'll see you later, Mary and Steven. Guys ducking out together? What's going on here? Dragonstone says seem to be more comparable to Jon Arryn than Pycelle in terms of personality. Yeah, I was about to get to that, but yeah, he seems much. Pycelle is a fairly. I'm not sure what the right word is. I mean, he's a toady for the Lannisters, and he seems to enjoy pushing conflict in a way that will help Tywin. Melos seems to be taking much more the idea of what's good for the realm rather than trying to push a personal vendetta or anything like that. Like, he's at the same time he's trying to make sure Rhaenyra will be able to rule, and then he's trying to make sure that Daemon's not going to challenge her. And also he would have stood up probably for Rhaenyra's rights. He's also the one that suggests it's kind of funny within Fire and Blood. If you haven't read the book, it's written by the fictional Maester Gildane, and he uses a bunch of different sources in order to try and pull together the different parts of history. And Melos is one of the characters who gets referenced quite a bit by Gildane, along with Mushroom. So it's from Melos, Grand Maester Melos, who wrote that he thought it was Viserys who had Harwin and Lionel Strong killed in Harrenhal in the fire. He's usually played as the conservative option, the reasonable option within the narrative. When Mushroom goes off and says insane things, Melos is the one that goes like, none of that happened. Like, it was way more boring than this. Like, everyone else is just making things up. So you're often led to the idea that Melos is right, but it's also probably true that he was covering certain things up. As you can tell from his character, he would not try to inflame things. He would rather smooth things over and everybody play nice rather than put out the sensational truth, I would say. Yeah, and he's not really scheming like Pycelle. Jon Arryn's a fine comparison. Maybe somebody like Maester Luwin. He'll probably play a lot like Luwin. Somebody that's just there to help. He doesn't really have a stated agenda. He's just doing his job, more or less. So yeah, look for a Pycelle. That should be Grand Maester Melos, more or less. Melos knows a lot about sex, comparing it to eating fish. Is that a thing he did? That sounds like a thing a Maester would write. So up next we have Graham Mctavish. Oops, wrong one. That's not Graham Mctavish. Get ready for this picture, by the way. This is the one I downloaded. I thought it was the best one. Graham Mctavish is the guy on the right with the sword out. He'll be playing Sir Harold Westerling. Harold Westerling is not on the greens or the blacks. He dies before the dance actually starts. I don't really know which side he would have been on, but description here is Sir Harold has served in the Kingsguard since the days of King Jaehaerys. He is a paragon of chivalry and honor. I'm guessing he probably would have supported Rhaenyra, but there's no way to know. He died before it happened. So as you can see from the picture, Graham Mctavish is an imposing Scotsman from Glasgow. Notably, he does a ton of voice work for animes and cartoons and video games. If you know who he is, it's probably from the fantasy drama Outlander. He plays Dougal and Buck Mackenzie at different times because it's a time travel show. So yeah, Graham owns his roles in both of those. He tends to, you could reasonably say he's like the most interesting man in the world from those Dos Equis commercials, except he's Scottish. Yeah. He also likes posting pictures on his Instagram of him just being absolutely shredded. So he's going to make a good Kingsguard in that sense. You also may know him. You probably don't recognize him, but he was also in the Hobbit movies. He played the dwarf Dwalin, the bald guy with the axes that went around trying to kill everybody. That was Graham Mctavish. He also played a character called the Saint of Killers, I think it is, in the AMC series Preacher. Graham's kind of an older guy. He obviously keeps himself in incredible shape. He tends to play a lot of warrior characters. But he can also play a wide variety of voices, so it's kind of tough to guess how he's going to be with Sir Harold Westerling. He's supposed to be from the Westerlands, and although he is Scottish, I mean, he's from Glasgow, if you listen to interviews of him using his normal speaking voice, he doesn't actually sound very Scottish. He sounds more English. No, he does not have a heavy Scots accent or anything like that. But he probably can put one on if he wants to. Maybe he'll try and talk like Barristan. Maybe he'll take on kind of a snooty thing, being a Westerling or something like that. It's hard to say. But one thing for sure, he's going to be playing, a very tough guy in the narrative. So Sir Harold Westerling, despite being Lord Commander of the Kingsguard for Viserys, is a relatively minor character in Fire and Blood. I'm going to guess, though, that he's going to get a lot more screen time in House of the Dragon. So the reason for that is after he dies, Sir Criston Cole becomes the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and then we get the whole Green Council, and Criston goes crazy, becomes the Kingmaker, that kind of thing. One thing that they might play on in the show, a minor detail from Fire and Blood, is that his relative, I think his niece, Johanna Westerling, marries Lord Jason Lannister. So if you're looking at the dynamics of how the Small Council may start out at the beginning of the show, there may be sort of an alliance of sorts between Sir Harold and Sir Tyland, that essentially that their houses are related by marriage. So they're both Westermen as well. Sir Harold would have grown up serving the Lannisters, so basically there should be a level of kinship between them in the factioning within Viserys' court. But getting back to the point that I think that they're going to expand Sir Harold quite a bit is that you don't cast, you don't cast Graham Mctavish with the idea that he's just going to be a guy standing on the sidelines of your TV show. He's somebody that tends to be a very powerful presence on screen. He's somebody that is a great speaking actor. He can do a lot of voices. He tends to be an imposing figure. So in terms of like, if you were just going to have Harold Westerling be somebody that shows up and then dies quickly and goes off the screen and that's kind of it, then you don't need to go after somebody like Graham. It's kind of a waste. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of probably, honestly, Graham McTavish's time to take a role where he's going to be in one episode and die. So when we're looking at a show that's probably going to be we know it's going to be featuring flashbacks of a young Rhaenyra and a young Alicent and Viserys as well. I think we're going to see that Sir Harold's going to get a much larger role than he gets in Fire and Blood. I mean, he's basically just like a name character in Fire and Blood, and then he disappears because Criston Cole is the more interesting Lord Commander. So yeah, I would expect to see Sir Harold Westerling get a much bigger role, although yeah, he does die pretty quickly. He dies before the dance. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to make use of him. Like, seriously. Why hire Graham McTavish for a role if nothing's going to happen? That seems insane to me. You don't cast Scots to rule the Westerlands. Well, that's the thing about Mctavish. Like I said, he doesn't sound Scottish, and he can put on a lot of different voices from his voice acting. So he can play basically whatever he wants. Quite a few of these characters are actually like Ryan Corr's Australian, Graham Mctavish is a Scotsman. I forget who else. There's somebody else here. Somebody else is Scottish as well, but it's just not going to show up. So next up we have... Oop, hang on a second. Getting the buff guy off the screen. This is Bill Patterson. He'll be Bill Patterson that way. He'll be playing Sir Lyman Beesbury. So the description here is the Lord of Honeyholt and Master of Coin on King Viserys' small council. I don't know much about Bill Patterson either. His most famous characters are more recent ones, and he plays sort of charming older guys, basically, like sort of dads or granddads characters. His most recent and famous role is that if you watch the TV series Fleabag, he plays the main character's dad. So in that role, he tends to play a bit of a pushover, somebody who doesn't have much of a spine, but, you know, sort of just a pleasant dad character. So that fits pretty well with what we should expect from Lyman Beesbury. Oh, Bill Patterson's also Scottish. That's the one I was thinking of. And yeah, like I said, Lyman Beesbury, he tends to fall into that role a bit. He was the Master of Coin under Jaehaerys, and I think by the time he dies in Fire and Blood, he's 80 years old. He essentially just was Master of Coin for decades. He was good at the job, and he's a likable character, and he's relatively non-threatening. So Jaehaerys just kept him on throughout most of his reign, and then after he died, Viserys said, "Why change it?" Lyman Beesbury's a good dude. So, as I said, a lot of these are small council related. So, if you're looking at how it's going to shape up, you're going to have Sir Tyland on there probably as Master of Ships. You're going to have Lyman Beesbury as Master of Coin. You're going to have Harold Westerling as the Lord Commander, who normally sits on the small council. Grand Maester Mellos obviously would be on the small council as well. And he's a little bit like Mellos in that he tends to be sort of a moderating force. He's just kind of there, though. He doesn't really do a lot. He's the one that gets thrown out the window. Well, kind of, maybe. So we don't know much about Lyman Beesbury other than the fact that he's just kind of like a permanent fixture in court of the small council. His big moment in the story is obviously during the Green Council following Viserys' death. Lyman is the one that speaks out against the High Tower coup that's underway, and that he essentially says, Rhaenyra is the queen, you guys are committing treason, I'm out of here. And there's two stories on what happens to him. Neither one are nice. The first one is that Criston Cole, after Lyman speaks, just walks up, takes a dagger, and slits Lyman's throat, killing him on the spot. The other story, the one that Mushroom tells, is that Criston grabbed Lyman, walked him out to one of the windows, and threw him out of it into the spiked moat around Maegor's Holdfast, and threw him down onto the spikes, impaling him, leaving him to die slowly from his wounds. That happens quite a lot, honestly, in Fire and Blood. People get thrown out into the spikes on outside Maegor's Holdfast. Either way, Lyman is not long for this world, but that's basically his big moment. He should... he'll be on the small council, he'll be advising Viserys, and as the war kicks off, he shuffles off pretty quickly in a gruesome way. And, whichever one actually happened, Lyman Beesbury is the first blood spilled during the Dance of the Dragons. The war kicks off with his death, basically. It serves an important role in the narrative, that it demonstrates the seriousness of what's going on from Leighton Hightower and Criston Cole and Alicent, that those that oppose them are essentially going to get killed in a palace coup. I speculated on the Lenar Strong stream that Lyman Beesbury's death may have served to essentially secure the loyalty of some members of small council who are probably like, well, I mean, I don't think Rhaenyra is going to kill us. I mean, she's just going to be queen. It's like, at that point, the threat is less from Rhaenyra directly, and it's actually coming from Kristen. They use Lyman Beesbury to essentially enforce their will on the rest of the council and those within the Red Keep. So Lyman is definitely he supports Rhaenyra. He would be on the Blacks, but again, he died pretty quickly, so he never really got a chance to do much. This will be a season 1 casualty, but should be kind of like a fan favorite sort of character. It's like, you're not used to liking characters on the small council, but you'll probably like Lyman Beesbury, especially if you think the Greens are shitheads. Yeah, fuck Kristen Cole. That's right. Apparently, there are Kristen Cole stans. I don't know why. Oh, I pronounced it wrong? It happens a lot. I'm bad at pronouncing things. Bet the Oh, good question here. What do fans want more, House of the Dragon or Winds of Winter? I would rather have Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring than the show, but we can have both, hopefully. Oh, there's actually a question from Twitter from user Kate Monster. Well, more of a comment. She said, Bill Patterson has the warmest, nicest grandpa energy, so of course he's playing Beesbury the Demonstrated. How come my favorite actors are playing the characters who die early? Why am I so excited for the show? I don't know if I am. I think that's a fair point. Like, I think Lyman Beesbury's death is going to be a pretty hard one to swallow. It's not going to feel like justice. It's just going to feel like murder from a likable character. Sort of like Ned Stark's death, sort of like the death of his men outside of Littlefinger's brothel, that kind of thing. It's going to feel pointless. It's going to feel cruel, and it's going to make you hate the Greens. But that's kind of the thing. It's his death is meant to essentially get you to go like, wow, Kristen and Alicent and no, it's not Leighton. It's Otto Hightower. I got that wrong. It's Otto Hightower. That what they're doing is wrong. That what they're doing is just a blatant power grab, and they're being shitheads about it. Of course, by the end of the dance, everybody's being shitheads, but this is like the start of it. And Lyman Beesbury ends up being, an extremely morally reprehensible act that starts off the dance. Let's see here. So next up, we have Gavin Spokes is being cast as Lord Lionel Strong. The description from the HBO's website is he's the Master of Laws, the King of Viserys, and Lord of Harrenhal. As the narrative goes on, Otto Hightower gets fired from the job, and Lionel is elevated from Master of Laws to Hand of the King. If you're looking at Gavin Spokes here, he seems very different from the guy that's going to be playing his son, Ryan Core. His son, that's going to be Harwin. You can see here that Lionel is a larger guy. He's kind of got a big head. He's balding, and I would say he's nowhere near as attractive as Ryan Core. He sort of seems like the kind of character you would cast as like a manager or a government civil servant. Kind of seems to be what his general vibe is. This is by far his biggest role in any film. He's done a lot of theater, though, like I was saying, and especially musical theater. He played, I got the picture here. He played King George. There it is. He played King George in the London version of Hamilton, might be what actually got him this role. He's mostly a theater actor. Comedies and musicals seem to be his thing. You can go on YouTube and you can look it up. If you search for Gavin Spokes, you'll see him actually singing the role of King George in Hamilton. He does a really good job at it, and he just kind of exudes that sort of entrenched nobility sort of thing. The kind of guy that like runs the government, and not the guy that's sort of goofing off, that he takes his job seriously. I think that's what you're supposed to get from the casting. And it seems to be kind of spot on. In his youth, what we know, Lionel Strong was known for his abilities in the melee and jousting. He was known as a fierce battler and quite strong, like his son Harwin. But over the years, that has kind of gone away. He decided to go to the Citadel and forged half a chain before he inherited Harrenhal. Honestly, not a bad character to think of would be Marwyn the Mage. Seems to be sort of similar kind of guys. You're okay not singing? He's a good singer. He's got a great voice. Yeah, we're gonna stick up with King George here. So yeah, he inherits Harrenhal, and at that point, Lionel gives up on the whole trying to be a maester thing. Although he does have, I think he has 6 links in his chain by that point, most of them in law, and more. I guess he was trying to be like a Westerosi lawyer. He would be welcome on the Learning Hands podcast. Much more serious than Mace, but actually that's not a bad thing to think about him. Notably, Lionel Strong is somebody that in the narrative is often underestimated by those who interact with him due to his larger size and the fact that he tends to talk pretty slow. Makes people think of him sort of like a lumbering oaf, like a bored bureaucrat, when he's actually one of the sharpest minds in the realm. He makes for a great hand of the king, an excellent master of laws. When you're looking at Viserys's small council, Lionel is one of them that would have been a driving force behind it. And again, when he became hand of the king. Sleekodexus, I don't know how the blacks will look heroic after the blood and cheese scene. They won't. That's like, I'm in Beesbury is the one where you go like, wow, the greens sucked. Blood and cheese is where you go, wow, the blacks suck. Well, especially Daemon. Daemon and Mysaria are really behind that. It's not the whole faction, but they tend to absorb it because that's how wars work. Yeah, Aaron's right. By the end of the dance, nobody's looking heroic. Everybody just kind of sucks by the end. That's the Dance of the Dragons. There's no clear good guys or bad guys. The war just kind of drags them down into horribleness and terrible, terrible actions against each other. And you know, Lionel Strong is a fairly fearsome person. He's excelled in his job as Master of Laws for Viserys and later Hand of the King, and he managed to do quite well for himself in his life. And he also tried very hard to get his sons to advance the family name, to make the Strongs a power within Westeros that would survive his eventual death, kind of like Corlys Velaryon. You know, he sends his son Harwin to be a captain of the Gold Cloaks. He sends Larys to be a confessor, and he's trying to give his sons more than just courtly education, you know, how to play politics. He wants to make sure they know how to do things, in particular, like not just be lordlings at court. He wants them to be like him. He wants them to have a trade. He wants them to be able to, you know, like literally do things other than just being a shithead that sits at balls, like most of the lords honestly are. We also know that it's Lionel who lobbied initially for Rhaenyra to marry Harwin. Maybe Lionel encouraged Harwin when he found out about their affair and the fact that he was cuckolding Lenar Velaryon. You know, it ended up working out anyway. If things had gone differently, if there was no war, Lionel Strong would have effectively captured the Iron Throne with the blood of his son through Rhaenyra. Which is something, it's like a constant plot within A Song of Ice and Fire, that if there's a Hand of a King, they're trying to marry one of their children into the royal family. Lionel almost pulls it off officially and then pulls it off unofficially. Ends up being... This is going to be a kind of character that you're going to be introduced to him and you're not going to think much of him. And then as the story goes on, you're going to see that he tends to sort of play the fool, or that he tends to pretend to be slow and dumb when he's actually outthinking everyone around him. Mace Tyrell was brought up earlier. That's actually more of a book thing. In the books, Mace is actually a lot smarter than he is in the show. He's very oafish in Game of Thrones. whereas he's quite sharp within Song of Ice and Fire. But Lena tend to play a double act where he plays the idiot and she plays the when you have to be careful around, when it's quite clear that both of them are playing on more or less the same level. Love to hear the dragons sing about taxes. I can't wait for that. That'd be great if it just returns as the musical. And I think if you're looking for what kind of character Lionel Strong might be played like in House of the Dragon, you could maybe think like Varys with Conleth Hill. Part of the reason is that Lionel is able to rise so high is that he doesn't actually wield that much personal power despite being a Lord of Harrenhal. Lord of Harrenhal is not a lordship that gets you a lot of money. It's not a lordship that gets you a lot of levies or armies or anything like that. You're not really a power within the Riverlands. It's more or less like the booby prize of the Riverlands. Oh, look, you got named the Lord of Harrenhal. Can't wait for your line to be extinct within a generation. That's more or less how it goes. So that's one of the things that gets people to overlook him, that he can't bully people around using his power outside of King's Landing. It's a similar thing to how the Velaryons, despite being the primary bannermen to the Targaryens for most of their history, that they never were rewarded with like lots of lordships and land, that essentially the Targaryens kept them as permanent servant levels. They made them master of ships a lot, they made them grand admirals, but they didn't really reward them with the ability to challenge them on a actual like war level. And it's the same kind of thing with Lionel Strong and the Strongs in general. You're going to see throughout probably House of the Dragon that this is going to be a running theme, that the Strongs are essentially trying to make the jump from loyal servants to power within the realm, and Lionel's the driving force behind that. Oh yeah, did I forget somebody? Did I forget one character? There was one other casting, wasn't there? Like I think I'm forgetting one. Oh yeah, that's right. There's one other character cast, kind of a minor one. No big deal. Oh wait, it's Sanry Bate. It's Matthew Needham got cast as Lenar Strong, aka Laris the Clubfoot. I went ahead and tried to find the most sad emo boy picture I could, and I think this is the good one. This one is this is a strange one for me. The description is he's just called from HBO, they say he's the younger son of Master of Laws Lionel Strong. He's brought to court by his father. That is a big understatement for how much of a huge character Laris ends up being within the Dance of the Dragons. He ends up being one of the most influential characters. He has a large amount of mystery. I did a whole 2-hour stream 2 weeks ago talking about him. He's gonna be a fascinating character, start to finish. Yeah, and actually in the chat, oh no, he's cute. Yeah, that's actually something that's really surprising about this casting. And it seems like it's aimed directly at Mallory. Matthew Needham really does have that dark emo boy good looks to him. He's thin and spindly. He's got curly black hair, got kind of crazy eyes. You can imagine that he would make like a good Kylo Ren or Jon Snow kind of character. Yeah, and he's notably fairly handsome, which is a bit of a twist for Laris. If you guys read Fire and Blood, there are pictures of Laris within it, and he's nothing to write home about. But they went ahead and and decided to make him handsome. They decided to cast a handsome character to play Laris Strong. And one in particular that seems to fit a particular demographic of thirsting. Super chat here from Kraken Queen. 50 PLN, thank you for the fabulous content. I can feel the hot D thirst in the chat growing stronger every minute. Hashtag hot D thirst. There's a lot of hot D thirst going around with these castings. It seems like maybe some of the thirsting that was expected for Daemon has essentially been absorbed by a lot of these casting roles. You know, from Graham McTavish, Matthew Needham, Ryan Core. It seems like they essentially said, well, we're not... Matt Smith is good looking, but he's not like the most handsome guy in the world. And they're like, okay, so let's just fill out the rest of the cast with like just straight up hunks. And they went for it. Yeah, Timothy Chalamet is not a bad comp. He kind of looks like him. Sexy Clubfoot. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody saw sexy Clubfoot happening. Oh yeah, thank you for the super chat, Kraken Queen. Yeah, so much thirst going on here. So yeah. The other thing is that Lenar Strong is not a character that has any known romances in Fire and Blood or any lovers. He only gets betrothed very late into the story in a political marriage that never ever happens. He gets his head cut off by Cregan Stark before it can happen with the Baratheons. So this is an unusual change. Although this could be kind of like maybe a Ramsay Bolton situation, where if you read his description within A Song of Ice and Fire directly, Ramsay Bolton is like grotesque. He looks like an ogre. He's got like these gigantic, weird, wormy lips. He's objectively pretty ugly. And instead, they went ahead and casted. I'm gonna struggle to pronounce this one. Ewan Rian was cast to play him, who's a fairly handsome guy. They also did a sort of a similar thing with Brienne of Tarth, where they got Gwendolyn Christie to play her when Brienne is a fairly homely character as described in the books. So there's probably a TV adaptation here thing where they want good-looking actors basically in order to try and sell a show. But this one is really out of left field. $5 from Sanrixian. Y'all are laughing and I'm sobbing. I'm sorry, Mallory. They went right for you. They decided to put in hot Laris for you. There's no reason Clubfoot couldn't be hot. That's fair. It's just I wasn't expecting this. I wasn't expecting them to pick someone like Matthew Needham to play him. Sure, they can. It just adds another dimension. Maybe just because it's a visual medium, they decided to do that. You know, he's gonna be playing kind of the what's the right word for it? A villainous crush sort of role in the show. The bad evil guy that the bad boy that makes hearts go aflutter. I also watched some interviews with him. These are actually kind of hard to find because he's not well known as an actor. He's mostly a theater guy. But he has a very deep, silky voice. He's also appears much younger than he actually is. I think if you look at the pictures of him, you probably guess he's somewhere in his mid to late 20s. He's actually 37 years old. So they're going to be having him play a character much younger than he actually is. Yeah, and as I said, he's largely a stage actor. He does a lot of Shakespeare. He does a lot of dramatic roles. This will be his biggest role by far. And as the show goes on, he'll be not a main character, but he'll get a lot closer to it. He's going to start off with a much smaller role, and then it's going to expand over time, especially as we get into the chaos around King's Landing, when it's revealed that Laris is basically behind everything. So get used to Matthew Needham. He's going to be there for a long time. Looked like somebody thought they found set pictures of him on there, and he's more or less playing like a straight black mullet instead of his black curly hair like you see here. So maybe they're gonna tone down his handsomeness. Kind of like they actually had to do that Gwendolyn Christie. They had to try really hard to make her not look as beautiful as she is. So yeah, get ready for get ready for hot Laris and hot Gregor. Shit is happening. Oh yeah, so one thing that's really exciting about this for me is that this casting sequence of the Strongs in particular essentially just takes a haymaker and knocks out all the very silly people that have been trying to theorize about how Corlys Velaryon being cast as a black man means that they'll be abandoning the Strong plot. Well, there was a few different possibilities people tried to put forward in order to try and headcanon their way around that. I mean, headcanon around the fact that they didn't actually understand like the point of the Strongs and how the bastardy worked between Harwin and Rhaenyra. So the first one that was often theorized is that because the Strongs were not announced in the first or second wave of castings, that they were just being cut from the show and the plot was being abandoned. Nope, all three of them are here. They're getting fairly high billing in terms of order of how they're being put into the show. Looks like the second possibility is that people thought that they would cast black actors to play the Strongs, so they would add ambiguity that maybe it would be so the kids might be Laenors, and it's like nope, they cast three very white guys, so that one's not happening. You know, there's no need to save the plot. I talked about this during a different live stream, that the point of the plot is that everybody knew that Rhaenyra's kids were Harwins and not Laenors, and it's not ambiguous. Everyone is supposed to know. They know before Jace was born that they were Harwin's kids. I talked about this at length in the Harwin stream, but to reiterate, it's because Rhaenyra and Laenor spent 0 time together, and Rhaenyra was publicly carrying on with Harwin, and Laenor is publicly carrying on with Joffrey Lonmouth. So as soon as Rhaenyra was announced to be pregnant, everyone just kind of went like, so that's Harwin's kid, isn't it? And then Jace was born, and we're like, yeah, definitely, that's Harwin's kid. So yeah, I'm glad that these castings essentially knocked out those very silly explanations, and I hope people just stop using them, because it's not going to happen. They're going to use the Harwin Rhaenyra plot, and it's just not what you think. It's not ambiguous. So there we go. Got that one out of the way. What it's actually going to be is it's going to be closer to like gaslighting, and it's going to be closer to Viserys and Rhaenyra using political power and the power of their dragons, basically, to get people to ignore the fact that the entire court knows that her 3 sons are Harwins and not Laenors, including Corlys. That's one of the sneaky things that actually pushed Daemon and Corlys together, is that both of them were upset about the fact that it was quite clear that Laenor was not having any kids with Rhaenyra. So yeah, go Strongs. Can't wait to see how this plot plays out. The funny thing is, the only characters in Fire and Blood that seem to be in the dark about who Jace, Luke, and Joffrey's dad is the 3 of them. Everyone else is just kind of like, yeah, Laenor's not your dad. That's just kind of a small thing. So let's go into sort of change gears a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit of set photos and what they've been filming. There's a lot of set photos, people hiding in hills and wearing ghillie suits and using long-range cameras like they did for Game of Thrones, trying to get pictures of what's going on the different shooting sets, largely within Cornwall in the southwest of England. So we're seeing tons and tons of scenes of beaches and weird battles, a lot of action on the beaches for some reason. From what we've seen so far, it looks like half of House of the Dragon is going to be taking place on like the same 3 beaches, with people walking around having conversations. So let's go through these. So this is Matt Smith playing Daemon. This is in his formal wear, I guess. Somebody snapped these pictures. Giving a nice point to him. Way to go, Damon. People are mad about the wigs. They're always mad about wigs. But it's cool to see like Damon's formal wear. You can see the how the coat itself kind of looks like it has dragon scales on it, and then if you look really closely, you can see how it's outlined with I'm not sure what the right word is, but there's a little bit of red going around it, kind of wrapped around it. A pretty nice little Targaryen thing. I think it's gonna be an awesome Daemon. That one looks cool. This was a weird one. I mean, I picked this one because it has a dog in it, and what a cute pooch. But they've been setting up what looks like a tourney pavilion somewhere. And there are really two big tourneys within Fire and Blood. There's the first one where with Criston Cole, where he beats the shit out of Harwin, Harwin Strong, and I think he breaks like his clavicle or something like that. And then the other one is when Rhaenyra gives her favor to Criston Cole, and Alicent's in there, and that's like the origin of the blacks versus the greens. That's when they didn't like each other at first. And there's been a lot of set photos of young Alicent and young Rhaenyra, so I'm guessing that's what we're going to see here: the origin of the feud between the two young women. But I'm not really sure. I mean, there could be more tourneys and jousts than I remember. Maybe they're going to put a few more in, but those are the ones that come to mind. Harwin especially getting beat up by Criston. That will be kind of interesting. But yes, House of the Doggo. More dogs. Always need more dogs. This here, we've got Lenar Velaryon on the right with his white dreadlock wig, I think. And then actually the guy next to him is Joffrey Lonmouth, his lover. This is what I was talking about, how Laenor is quite publicly gay within the story, and he takes several lovers. The first one is Joffrey Lonmouth, who actually, I think Criston Cole actually kills during, or comes close to killing during one of the tourneys. But it's quite obvious that Harwin and Rhaenyra are the father, that Harwin's the father of Rhaenyra's kids, because while Rhaenyra and Harwin are off doing whatever they're doing, we can see here that Laenor is running off with his own lovers and gets caught and stuff like that. So it's not like Renly, where it's a little bit more secretive. Renly's relationship with Loras Tyrell is a bit more on the down low, especially in the books. Laenor is very much not doing that. Everyone knows that he and Joffrey are an item, especially when he marries Rhaenyra. Let me see if I have a picture of that. Like here, this would probably be right after they're betrothed and they're sort of talking about it and like how their marriage is going to work. I'm guessing that's what the scene's supposed to be, dressed up in their formal wear. Again, there's a lot of walking on the beach in House of the Dragon so far. Young Rhaenyra on the right, young Laenor on the left. Unclear if they cast an older Laenor. Maybe not. Maybe he'll be dead by the time it starts. But there's definitely an idea that they're trying to make Rhaenyra look like somewhere between Daenerys and Cersei. I mean, those almost look like Lannister colors on Rhaenyra right there. So I think that's within the narrative of Fire and Blood. You're supposed to see a lot of Cersei in Rhaenyra in particular, but clearly they're also going up for a little bit of Daenerys here, that you're supposed to be thinking of both of them. I know people don't like wigs. I don't care about wigs. Not a thing that rustles my jimmies, as it were. I'm sure it will look better in post-production, and I don't know, this is just one of those things that I don't get fired up about. I think the costumes look fine. I only really notice them when they're like particularly bad, and these look fine to me. Like they're clearing the basic level of there's the movie Elizabeth with I think Kate Blanchett. As long as they're as good as those, I pretty much don't mind. Gray area hated the dress. I'm sure. It's not really. I'm more interested in like what they're doing here. They're probably the conversation they're having, and contrast it with the previous one with Lenar and Joffrey essentially in the bushes. This may be right after their engagement, and essentially all four of them essentially trying to deal with the fact that none of them want this marriage to happen, and it's being forced on them, and how they can make this marriage work. And it turns out they just don't. Rhaenyra and Laenor do not make the marriage work. They essentially pretend it doesn't exist and just sort of do their own thing. They act like they're not married. This one I highlighted because it looks like the Celtigars, House Celtigar, and their pinchy crabs have made their way into the narrative. There's a lot of these where there looks to be a lot of war camps. I'm guessing this is during Daemon's conquest of the Stepstones. So we should be seeing Daemon crown himself at some point. That does happen. After he's been exiled, he essentially, with Corlys, tries to take all the Stepstones back from the pirates and the free cities from Essos, using his dragon and fighting on the beaches and stuff like that. I'm guessing that's what it's supposed to be. There's also, we're seeing young carriages with young Alicent. I'm assuming this has to do with the tourney pictures, that they're all on their way there. That's what these are for. This one was actually the most interesting one to me because we get Rhaenys, the queen who never was, on the far right. And then it looks like the two boys talking to her, those might be the Strongs. Those might be Jace and Luke, I think. Joffrey's the youngest. They certainly look like they could be Strongs. They look enough like Ryan and Cor that they could have been cast to be his kids. Pinchy crabs. Yeah, I think this is pretty cool. Rhaenys is going to be one of the really cool characters in season 1. It's going to be sad when she dies. Spoiler alert. It's going to be hugely tragic, but she's a fierce character. One of the best ones in the Dance of the Dragons and in Fire and Blood in general. If there was a fan fiction to be written about Fire and Blood and the Dance of the Dragons, I would have it so that Rhaenys survives much longer. She's an incredibly cool character. She's like who Daemon wants to be, basically. Yeah, young-looking nobles talking to Rhaenys. Maybe they're extras or something, but I could definitely... Oh, whoopsie daisies. Definitely look to me like those could be Luke, Jace, or Joffrey. Oh, hey, Top Shelf fandom. Good to have you here. Cate Blanchett and Queen Elizabeth I and the costumes, they were kind of ridiculous. Like, some of them got over the top, but you know, that's my low bar. As long as they're clearing that, I don't really care about the costumes. It's a shame. I wish Rhaenys would stick around longer, but not everyone can. This is what I was talking about with the idea that they're filming a lot on beaches and there seems to be a lot of battles. These appear to be pirates from Essos. And then if you look at this scene right after it, there are guys, looks like the aftermath of the battle, that they've been tied to stakes essentially to die in the surf or something like that. That seems like the sort of thing Daemon would do. Or they're his men being killed by the pirates because there appear to be so on the left-hand side. So definitely I think we're going to be seeing a lot of Daemon's conquest of the Stepstones, and that may be why there's so many beach shots of what's going on. I think this one kind of... I actually really like this set photo because of the way that young Rhaenyra is looking. Like, this is like what their marriage actually was like. Laenor is looking off disinterested, and she's looking at something else, probably Harwin, being like, love that breakbones. Here we get Graham Mctavish. He's in his armor as Harold Westerling. I think that's supposed to be who he is. Not sure what's going on with the bones behind them in the carriage. This could be something around the dragons. Otherwise, I don't really know why there would be so many animal bones in a carriage. And this is the thing that everyone went wild for last week. We had Matt Smith. We finally got to see Dark Sister. It looks like essentially this is a grieving moment for him. Something went very poorly, and he's essentially just having a moment of like a bit of a breakdown in the surf or something like that. He plunges Dark Sister into the sand and essentially wades into the water, and then. But it could also just be Matt Smith being silly. I don't know how much of this would be something that's in the show. Maybe the stuff of kneeling in the water, but him laying on the sand. That just seems like Matt Smith. He's kind of a silly guy. It could be the Dragon Pit, Aaron. That's right. But yeah, so we're definitely going to be seeing Dark Sister and Blackfire during it, and this is Dark Sister itself. So all of you that have been the Valyrian Steel stands for so long, get ready for that. This appears to also be another battle thing people have looked at, and it looks like you have Corlys, and then you have Daemon, maybe Rhaenys. This is probably a war council at the breakout of the Dance of the Dragons. I think people have looked at the shorter characters. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse. No, you can't. If you look below Corlys, there's a line of what looks like pretty short people in armor that may be Luke, Jason, Joffrey. Even though they weren't allowed to take part, they definitely wanted to. That could be them. And that's really... There have been a bunch of other things, but they mostly boil down to characters walking on beaches, talking to each other, some battle scenes, and some sort of turning they're setting up. And that's sort of where they're at, which... Rather than like trying to figure out exactly what the plot is going to be, it seems like they're sticking pretty... They're sticking pretty hard to the main story, and it also tells us that we're going to be getting quite a lot of flashbacks, most likely, because the tourney is separate from Laenor and Rhaenyra's betrothal. So I'm guessing they're going to be cutting backwards in time quite a lot, especially if they're be giving Graham Mctavish and Harold Westerling a much bigger part than it's in the book. So I think they're going to try and develop the animosity between the Greens and the Blacks a lot more than exists within Fire and Blood. Like in Fire and Blood, you're sort of just told they don't like each other from some parties, and that there's a sort of factioning within the court, and that's where it grows out from, but not really like the specific inciting actions. What do they really not like about each other? What made Alicent and Rhaenyra like hate each other and make that grow into a civil war? I'm guessing that's what we're supposed to get from this, and that season 1 probably won't get much beyond like maybe Rhaenys' death. That may be where season 1 ends, something like that. So the other thing, hang on a second, go back to this. Done with pictures. I don't have any more for this. So the last thing I want to talk about is Dark Sister blowing air horns. Is the podcast that came out. So the podcast itself is called The Stuff Dreams Are Made From. It's put on by showrunner of House of the Dragon, Ryan Condal, and David Mandel. If you've never heard of David Mandel, he's actually quite famous. He's a writer and producer, and he's done shows like Seinfeld, Veep, Curb Your Enthusiasm. And they're essentially just two guys essentially geeking out about collectibles. So movie props, comic books, toys, and stuff like that. It turns out these guys who run major TV shows are just collecting fiends, and that's basically the whole podcast. It's just collecting memorabilia from pop culture and that kind of stuff. Sort of like Kevin Smith's TV show he did a few years ago about the that comic book shop that he put on with his friends. It's a little bit like that, but in podcast form. So episodes have them talking exclusively about different movie swords and which ones they own and which ones are the coolest. Other ones are like Indiana Jones's hat. Another one is about some movie prop auctions that they were trying to buy stuff from. So it's honestly very much, the podcast itself is not really focused on what they do for their day jobs. They do talk about it. It does come up. But that's not really what it is. It's not Ryan Condal sitting down and essentially just gabbing about what they've been doing on House of the Dragon. It's a very different property. This episode, the one that made the news, is a very, very special one, though, because they brought on George R.R. Martin himself to talk. And it's mostly, the podcast itself, this episode is mostly about just like their different collectibles. Because if you don't know this about George, he keeps everything. He's done like house tours and stuff like that. If you look up on YouTube, you can check him out. He has all of his toys from when he was a little kid. He has a wide collection of like little metal miniature soldiers. He's got the robot from Lost in Space. Got one of the real ones just sitting in his house. He's got a huge collection of books and comic books and that kind of stuff. So they brought him on to talk about all that stuff. But since Ryan Condal is working on House of the Dragon and George is who he is, they started talking about it a little bit during the episode. So I got the description here from the podcast. This is what they published. They said, "The stuff dreams are made of is back, and this time David and Ryan brought a friend, George R.R. Martin. George talks about his life as an accumulator of many things like antique toy knights and prop goodies from Beauty and the Beast. The guys also talk comic books and Steve Ditko art, Bayonne pizza, George wanting to possess his own severed head." That one was actually pretty funny. And of course, House of the Dragon. No, they did not ask about the book. The severed head thing is that George is very disappointed that during Game of Thrones, he wanted a fake head of himself to be made and used as one of the heads on spikes. But the budget wasn't there to get it done. So they ended up buying just a box of used heads, and that's where the whole George Bush being beheaded in Game of Thrones story came from. And George essentially bemoaned that he never got this done. And then Ryan Condal essentially just sort of speaks up and says, "You know what, George? We can make that happen for you. We'll get a prosthetic head of you made. We'll use it as one of the beheaded heads within House of the Dragon, and you can keep it." And George is like, "Awesome. Perfect." Where can you find out more about How Strong? There's a playlist of How Strong on my channel. I don't know if one of you guys could grab it and put it down there for Enough Said. I think there's like 5 live streams just about the Strongs. I also put out the video a while ago talking about the relationship between the Strongs and the Starks. Amanda, Crowfoot's daughter, and I have also talked a lot about how Duncan the Tall is probably a Strong. That's her theory that I basically have adopted and believe to be true. Really great insight from her on that one. So there are a few big things that came out of the podcast episode when George was talking to him. So the first one is that Dark Sister and Blackfire will be seen in House of the Dragon. I showed you already the picture of Dark Sister. Aegon II ends up having Blackfire. But the way it's presented in the podcast is pretty funny, because George just kind of says it, and then and then him and David Mandel just sort of riff on it, being like, "Oh my god, it's a massive spoiler. We're so sorry, Ryan. We didn't mean to do this." And you could tell Ryan's just sitting there stewing, because clearly, as being the showrunner of House of the Dragon, he has to be very careful about what sort of information he puts out there to not spoil things. But essentially, they just tease him about this. And George essentially explains the joke after Ryan just sort of like mumbles something. He says like, "What does it matter? If they've read Fire and Blood, they know Dark Sister and Blackfire show up," and he just starts laughing. So that's not really a spoiler. Like, of course they're going to be in the narrative. They show up. Daemon uses Dark Sister all the time, and it features prominently in his battle over the God's Eye with Aemon One Eye. So that was going to happen. Aegon II definitely has Blackfire throughout the war, so both of them will be there. I just thought it was funny hearing them tease Ryan Condal about it. Where, yeah, I imagine that he has to be very careful about what he says on this podcast to essentially to not give anything away. Although, as George said, there's not a lot to give away if you've read the books. That one made the news. It's not particularly big news. Another thing that came up is that Ryan essentially explained how big a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire he is. He's been a fan of the books going back 20 years at this point. He talks about how he read the books at first, read them over and over again, and then he bought the audiobooks on CD, and then had to essentially rip them from CD to put them on the podcast, and how much he loved Roy Dotrice's narrative, and they talk about that for a bit. But they also go on to explain how they met. Basically, that Ryan was a Song of Ice and Fire super fan, and he was represented by the same agency as George. So when Ryan was in New Mexico, shooting for a movie or TV series. I forget which one. He essentially got his agent to get him a dinner with George, to buy him dinner and to try and meet him. And from there, their friendship has essentially blossomed to the point that it actually seems like they really are friends. They talked about what they have in common, and it's actually quite a lot. They're both from New Jersey. They're both New York Giants fans. They love collecting things like comic books and figurines and movie and TV props and stuff like that. They both got into the industry basically as screenwriters. So it's essentially like, it almost seems like a protege and a master relationship between them, like a teacher and protege, that kind of thing. You can sort of tell sometimes when people work with each other and they give interviews that they're not actually friends, that they're coworkers basically. And it seems like there's actually quite a lot of affection between Ryan and George, which may not have been there so much for Dan and Dave and George. Although one funny thing that came out of it is that when Game of Thrones was going on, Ryan Condal did try to get a job on Game of Thrones. He wanted to be a staff writer, and his agent told him it was a no-go. They don't have any staff writers. They essentially just had Dan and Dave, and then they had Dave Hill and Brian Cogman, who kind of just like checked the scripts, and that was kind of it. So that was Ryan Condal's big disappointment. He's essentially like one of us that found his way into the entertainment industry, which is pretty cool. Did he ask him who is Jon Snow's mother? I imagine Ryan would have been able to answer that one pretty easily. If he were like 10 years younger, he probably would have like a YouTube channel or a podcast talking about A Song of Ice and Fire. Yeah, I think it does bode well for the quality of the series. One thing that they also brought up is that George helped Ryan quite a bit with the pitch, and that he helped him with mapping out the first season. Because if you go into the history of Game of Thrones and how it was produced, that's essentially what George did for Dan and Dave. In the first couple years, he was much more hands-on, and he was helping them write the scripts, and he was helping them plot things out, and what to cut, what not to cut, how to change things to make them better for the adaptation. And it seems like that's sort of what's going on here, that George is helping out Ryan quite a bit, or he did help him out quite a bit. And you can tell because one of the writers for House of the Dragon is Ty Mickle, who was one of George's assistants for a long time. So I think it's clear that one of the things that got House of the Dragon off the ground was, in particular, that George likes Ryan, and he's trying to make sure the project succeeds. Maura and Lisa said, they announced any actors playing any of the Starks. No Starks, no Cregan Stark. They wouldn't even be in the first season, I don't think. Starks don't show up until the war actually kicks off, and then Jace Velaryon goes up to Winterfell. So that might be early season 2. I don't even know if that would be in season 1. Reds and the Green to Game of Thrones Christmas special. Yeah. This shields in the corner of my stream put are strong shields, aren't they? Yeah. I needed a background for this, and hang on a second. If I drop out the video, you can probably see it. This is a background Mallory made for me for my How Strong video, and I thought it was so good with the parchment and the way she made the corners that I just made it a permanent part of my stream thing. So the other big news, this is the other thing that I said was targeted directly at Sanrixian, and that they dropped the nugget that there is going to be 17 dragons in the first season of House of the Dragon. So some people made fun of this on Twitter. I thought it was actually pretty good. It is kind of like, yeah, it's a really random number. And if you're not super invested in the fandom, I can see why you wouldn't get why people would care that much. So I went ahead and I went through the wiki and I pulled out all of the names of all the dragons that are involved in the Dance of the Dragons. So here we go. Arax, Cannibal, Carax, Caraxes, I did that wrong. Dreamfire, Grey Ghost, Meleys the Red Queen, Moon Dancer, Morgul, Morning, Sea Smoke, Sheepstealer, Shrikos, Silverwing, Vermax, Stormcloud, Sunfire, Cyrax, Tessarion, Tyraxes, Vermithor, and Vagar. But that's 20 names, so I'm not sure which 3 they're going to cut out. The obvious ones would probably be Grey Ghost, Cannibal, and Sheepstealer, the wild dragons on Dragonstone. The whole Dragon Seeds plot doesn't show up until midway through the war, when they start losing their dragon riders, and Rhaenyra and Daemon say, like, anybody who wants to try to ride a dragon, give it a shot with the wild ones. So I'm guessing if you had to take of those 20, which are the 17, I would cut out the wild dragons, but they may cut out some of the baby ones. Like some of these were born and then died very quickly in the dragon pit, or they only showed up at the very end of it. Not really sure which way they're going to go, but that would be my guess. And the idea that they're actually going to put in 17 dragons, so there's not really a good reason to put them all in unless you're going to make them different from each other. I was talking about at the top of the stream how it's actually really hard if you watch Game of Thrones to tell the difference between Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal. With 17 dragons, they're going to have to put a lot more effort into actually coloring them right, or just coloring them differently, because otherwise you're just going to get lost visually for the viewer. You're going to have to be able to tell apart, like, okay, so which dragon is this? Why does it matter? Who do they belong to? Especially if you see them without their riders. So this is something that should be really exciting for people that are just like 100% on board for seeing as many dragons on the screen as you can. You have to put in the effort to differentiate them and probably make them look more like the book versions than they did for the original series. Because otherwise, yeah, it's just going to be lost in how are you going to tell them apart? Why would it even matter? It ends up being actually quite a big part of Fire and Blood. And Dance of the Dragons, being able to tell apart the different dragons, and who's riding who, and especially because there are so many dragon battles that it's going to be lost visually on the viewer if they show a dragon flying across the sky and you can't even tell which one it is. Oh, another one from Morally, $20. Thank you again, More. Super generous for the dragons and Dark Sister. And Blackfire. Don't forget Blackfire. We're going to get to see the Sword of Kings in this one. Yeah, that's right, Mallory. They actually have to commit to variety and design. They have to do, they have to put in more effort this time. They have to. Otherwise, it's not going to work on the screen. So, for people that like seeing the different dragons, this is actually, that's why it's important news. Well, not important, but that's why it's news. Fans of all 20 different dragons that show up in the Dance of the Dragons are going to be high-fiving each other the whole way down. There's also a little bit of tea dropped here. Essentially, during the episode, it's implied that Ryan Condal is the only person that was putting forward a successor show for HBO that has read all the books. Massive tea-dropping moment. That would be surprising to me if you tried to put together a Game of Thrones successor show and you haven't read them, because that's where you're going to get it from, aren't you? Like, maybe he's just, I don't know how either of them would know this. Maybe that would be something coming from like the executives, I would assume. Somebody's telling some drama stuff out here, essentially saying that Connell's the only one who's read all the books that George has put out for Song of Ice and Fire. That's kind of funny, especially when you look at some of the names in them. Like, can you imagine if like what was the one, the Valyrian one? If you tried to make a Valyrian show and you haven't read like the World of Ice and Fire, that's where all the info comes from. Although it's probably not that surprising. A lot of adaptations are not super faithful to source material. That I mean, it just makes sense. But a lot of things that are written in books just don't translate to a screen very well. So it's not uncommon for that to happen. But I guess it would be, why wouldn't you just do this anyway to make sure that you like have a leg up on other shithead producers out there that are, or potential showrunners that are trying to make a show? Um, interesting tea being dropped right there. Oh, another $20 from Morley. Thank you, Mora, for House Strong and Blackfire. There you go. Yeah, Christina says, can't wait to see Sunfire and Tessari and Dreamfire. They all sound, a lot of the dragons in the Dance of the Dragons are going to be very, very different from what you remember from Game of Thrones. A lot of bright colors. I think Moon Dancer looks pretty ridiculous. Baelish, the Red Queen, looks incredible. So does Caraxes. So it should be very, very, very different dragons. Like something more like World of Warcraft, like the way they have their dragon flights. Think that. That should be closer to what it is. So the last thing that came out of this podcast that is relevant to like House of the Dragon and A Song of Ice and Fire in general, they didn't talk much. I don't think they talked at all about the Winds of Winter. And that is that George had previously pitched a Dunk and Egg show, which HBO wasn't interested in at the time. They didn't talk about the Dunk and Egg show that is currently supposedly in development at HBO. If you guys aren't aware, I did a stream about this a while back, talking about the different potential spin-offs. They announced like 6 of them at once. Dunk and Egg was actually Ryan Condal's first pitch. He wanted Dunk and Egg, and they turned him down for that. But afterwards, after he got House of the Dragon off the ground, they apparently went back, and it's not really clear who's attached to it, what level of development's even in. It might even just be like a folder, like a Google Doc somewhere where people have typed in Dunk and Egg and like some basic stuff. But supposedly there will be a Dunk and Egg series out there. The interesting thing is that this happened to House of the Dragon as well. That HBO has been pitched the same idea multiple times, turned it down initially, and then made it anyway. Like for instance, if you don't know this, one of the initial pitches for a successor show came from Game of Thrones writer Brian Cogman. He pitched the Dance of the Dragons, essentially House of the Dragon, what we're seeing now, and whatever his pitch was, HBO passed on it, and then he went off and I think he got a job working on the Lord of the Rings show for a bit. I don't think he's doing that anymore. I forget what he's up to these days. Probably just doing some screenwriting or something like that. But after Cogman's pitch for the dance failed, well, this is I made a video about this, and I thought it was pretty funny at the time. Cogman pitches it. HBO says no. Fire and Blood is then released by George R.R. Martin, and then Condal comes back with Fire and Blood, pitches it with the book in hand, and now it gets greenlit. So presumably you can, I think there's some inference there that the reason that Ryan Condal is making House of the Dragon now has a lot to do with George's support and also his making the book, so that it's not, so that a lot more of it is coming directly from source material, and rather than him trying to essentially make up a whole story, making up a story whole cloth. Because if you just read The Princess and the Queen and The Rogue Prince, you get a good amount of the dance, but George really expanded it in Fire and Blood, and it almost reads like an outline for a TV show, to be honest. So I thought that was pretty interesting, that trying to figure out the inner workings at HBO, how they're deciding which projects and which showrunners to push forward. That it may be that George is essentially playing a little kingmaker stuff with who he's approving of, which projects he likes in terms of what's going forwards. Especially because the news came out a little while ago that they re-upped his massive contract for all this stuff, and that Ryan said during this podcast that George has been helping him quite a lot with getting House of the Dragon's pitch like up and running, as well as getting the show off the ground. So yeah, if you're the kind of person that really didn't like the last few seasons of Game of Thrones because they weren't sticking to the books as much as you like, and that you thought that Dan and Dave were going off script too much, well, George has essentially gone back the other way, and he's handed essentially an outline of a TV show to Ryan Condal and Fire and Blood, and that he's currently helping them. They appear to be relatively good friends, more than just colleagues, and yeah, that's something to be excited about if that was a problem you had with the last few seasons. Duncan Egg books should probably come back. Well, if it's the rumor about Duncan Egg is that it's going to be an animated show, and animated shows take a lot longer to make than they do for than live action ones. Actually, Sanrixian knows about that quite a bit in the chat. She's talking about how she is a 3D artist. She works on TV shows, and yeah, it takes animated stuff has a lot longer lead time than live action shows. Like some movies, some movies are shot, all the like the camera work is done in like 4 months, and then they'll spend 2 to 3 years working on the CGI and 3D design to get it all done. So if they're doing a Duncan Egg animated show or or cartoon or something like that, it's not going to be around for quite a long time. So they have time to essentially focus on House of the Dragon, get it up and running, see if the audiences are showing up for it before they really have to get too serious about any of the other shows that they have planned. I don't think he regrets choosing Dan and Dave. I mean, they made him one of the wealthiest authors in the world. That show did incredible. When his book sales go through the roof. I mean, he's not. He's made it clear that it's not entirely his version, and that he's said before. Actually, that this anecdote came up during the podcast where he said that Dan and Dave wanted to end it early because in other instances, George has essentially said that he thought you could have gotten 12 seasons out of the books, which is probably a little ambitious. But that's just kind of how it goes. Yeah, I don't think he regrets working with Dan and Dave with HBO to make Game of Thrones. He probably would have done things differently if he was more involved the whole way through. But that's sort of a problem that happened, that he started to. That one's a two-way street, because they essentially started the series thinking that George was going to finish the book series, or at least get close to it before the show ended, and then that just didn't happen. So on one hand, you can be annoyed that Dan and Dave ended the show earlier, but at the same time, Winds of Winter and Dream of Spring weren't there to adapt. So what are they supposed to do? There's a little bit of fault there to go around with everybody. That's the nature of adaptations, that not everything the original writer or creator of a thing ends up on the screen. It happens all the time. Yeah, that's right, Mallory. So many people are involved with animated stuff. You can't imagine how much time and effort goes into every little part of an animated thing that you watch on the screen. So whatever they're doing for Dunk and Egg will take forever. And actually, the same for House of the Dragon. This is the sort of the backside of the 17 Dragons things. Those are going to take a long time and a lot of money to animate and make them look different. And like you can't also like like Mortal Kombat, where like Sub-Zero and Scorpion and Reptile are all just recolors of the same source images. You're not really going to be able to do that with this. So there's going to be individual design done for each of the dragons to get their sizing right, like behavioral stuff, all that sort of thing. Don't think I said everyone made that point. Yeah, I think that's really overlooked. It's like if you take a job adapting a series and you have 4 or 5 books and you're expecting to have 7 so that you can faithfully put them on the screen, it's tough to do that when you don't have them, you know? So there's some blame to go all around with with the end of Game of Thrones and people not liking where it went, but you can't just say Dan and Dave were essentially like it's all their fault, they're the worst. It's like, well, they didn't have the source material because it wasn't published. So what are you supposed to do? Well, anyway, so if you want to go listen to the whole podcast thing with George and Ryan Condal and David Mandel, I put the link in the description. I thought it was just like a good podcast in general. Ryan and David have a good rapport. It's really interesting hearing them passionate about a lot of the stuff. I don't actually know much about like collecting comic books and movie props and like how the economics of it works and like how you verify that something is real from a set. Also, just hearing a lot of backstory from George about his young life, how much he really, really, really loves comic books, and that's probably if you're looking for like analysis of what's in Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire, like comic books are probably really, really underexplored in terms of that because that was his passion as a kid. He loved comic books. But like what kind of collections he has, all that other kind of stuff. I thought it was, I think it's just a good listen on in general. I think it sounds like a pretty good podcast, and it just has an added bonus that it happens to contain some news and some tea about House of the Dragon. It's all my fault for the failings of season 8. Yeah, that's right. I didn't cheerlead enough for them. Oh, that's true. HBO, you should have given me more shill bucks. Then I would have sung your praises even more. You know what's crazy? Some people actually think that happens. Those people have lost their mind. Yeah, Dan and Dave made season 8 and season 7. Yeah, but they also made seasons 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they made the good parts and the bad parts. If you think the last few seasons were bad parts, so hopefully that won't happen with House of the Dragon. It seems like him and Ryan have a pretty good relationship, and he's basically given him an outline of what to do with the show from Fire and Blood. It's a complete narrative, start to finish. Um, so there's no waiting for anything. They just have to ask him for details, and that's basically it. Aaron, is that true? You waited to be a patron of mine because you were salty I didn't hate season 8? That's kind of funny. Yeah, I didn't hate season 8. I thought it was I did a video where I did like a wrap up of what I thought of the season, um of the finale itself and like season 8 in general, and I was like, yeah, it's good. It's not great, it's not fantastic. I think I gave it like a 7 or 7.5 out of 10 or something like that, where it was like there were really good moments, there were some things that weren't that great. They moved too quickly through some parts, and They probably could have gotten like an extra episode or two out of it and then like filled in a few gaps, but there were parts I really loved, and you know, it's not the best season of Game of Thrones, not even by a long shot, but it was pretty good. I enjoyed watching it. It could have been an 8 out of 10 though, HBO, if you just give me the HBO shill bucks. Please don't take that seriously. Of course, I'm joking. Again, if you think that kind of thing happens, you're out of your mind. I was too kind? No, it's not too kind. It's my opinion. Opinions vary from person to person. That's just how they work. So I think that's probably about it. We've gone a little bit over today. So I hope that was a good look at the casting for all of you guys, like who these characters are, what they probably will do in season 1, maybe a little bit of info about the actors themselves. Seriously, go watch David Horowitz read his the sonnet. It was like almost ASMR-y. Looking forward to a lot of these actors. I think it seems like they made good choices from what I could find. Yeah, and go listen to that podcast with it's called "This Stuff Dreams Are Made Of" with Ryan Condal and David Mandel. The latest ones with George R.R. Martin. I thought it was just fascinating in its own right. So I'm probably actually just going to listen to more episodes of that podcast and see if it's something I enjoy in general without George coming on. Ryan and David were just interesting podcast hosts to begin with. So, yep. Thanks everybody for stopping by. Thanks for all the super chats from Maura Lee, Sanrixian, Kraken Queen, Carolina Blues, Ramona Zamfir, Danny McKay. What do I have coming up? Oh yeah. By the end of the month, chapter 7 of Dying of the Light will be coming out. I'll be recording that over the next few days. If you enjoyed this and had a good time watching the stream, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the little bell button for notifications, and if you want to support me more, unless you're like Aaron, who is just upset at my season 8 takes, you can go to patreon.com/JoeMagician, where you can get access to content early, get access to patron-only stuff like the Dying of the Light read through, and the patron Slack and all that stuff. That's about it for me today. Oh, hey Jinx Lier making a sudden entrance to the stream. How you doing? Oh yeah, I have a bunch of plants. I have 5 succulents, a peace lily. I forget what it's called, like a honey. No, this is a big plant. It's actually I have to cut it again because it's trying to reach to the floor. I have a dragon tree over here. Plus my garden outside. I love garden. But yeah, thanks guys. I'll see you all next week. Let me hang on. Is Radio Westeros streaming today? Radio Westeros. I don't know if they're streaming today. Yeah, pothos. That's the name of it. A pothos plant. Fun fact: you can just take one of these little nubs down here, and you can just plant a new one. That's why they only cost $1. You can take a whole plant, and it will grow from that one. Let me check their Discord real fast. Oh yeah, Steven. Yeah, that's right. Steven Stark, Kirby Dragon sent a super chat. Sorry, I missed that one. By the end of these streams, I get a little punchy and I don't think Real Westeros is streaming today. Yeah, I don't think so. So what can you check out next? History of Westeros is probably streaming tomorrow, and then I hear Dragons usually goes on after them. But yeah, check all that stuff out. I'll see you.